here, right now. This is Right Time Reborn, America's newest political podcast, coming to you from sunny Florida and sunny upstate New York. Well, I'm assuming it's sunny up there. It is May. So I'm your host, Rebecca, and we've got co-host Brittany O'Toole. She's I think you're sitting outside right now, right?
I am sitting outside. It is pretty sunny. It's actually pretty beautiful. Pretty beautiful New York 75-degree May day. Very bad allergy that day though. Very bad allergy.
I grew up in your area for most of my life, and it is a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. It's too bad the Democrats have ruined it politically and economically.
I mean, as I'm filming this, I'm sitting on the Hudson River, and it is beautiful. And before this, I lived on Long Island, which is super beautiful, but the policies make it hard to live.
It's hard to live anywhere in the Northeast right now, or any of the other blue states, Illinois or the West Coast or what have you. So anyway, this is the last week or so has been exciting in presidential politics, and it's going to prove to be more exciting the next few days. So let's cover that a little bit. On Friday, South Carolina U.S. Senator Tim Scott announced that he is running for president. He had previously formed an exploratory committee, which we all know is just, a veiled way of saying I'm running, but I'm just not ready to tell you all that I'm running. But he announced he's running for president, and he also announced that he's going to be putting $5.5 million into advertising in Iowa and New Hampshire, which, it sounds like a lot of money, but in today's political world, it's not all that much.
Right. I mean, I agree. Well, first, I'd like to touch bases and kind of air my grievances on the exploratory committees, because everyone knows that. I actually heard a couple of commentators that I listened to say the same thing with exploratory committee. It's kind of like a waste of everyone's time. A lot of people don't like it. It's like, oh, we know you're running, like, just do it. And actually, I'm not going to lie. I worked a little bit on Ben Carson's exploratory committee in the very early phases of that primary season in 2016.
But Ben Carson thought he was doing exploratory surgery.
I mean, I'm not going to get on a tangent right now about Ben Carson. I don't have bad things to say, but yeah, that's the exploratory committees. Yes, we know you're running, so now you're formally announcing it. And I actually know I have worked briefly with his communications director. I believe she did work for Lee Zeldin before. So I mean, I like Tim Scott. I liked what they were putting out about it. It's just the exploratory committee is annoying. But at least now he's announced. I don't know about the funding that he has. And I believe we talked about it on the podcast before, maybe not. But, with Nikki Haley in the race, I think that's a little problematic. And it's almost like, are either of them running to just set up for future options? They know they can't split their home state like that, especially when they're already not in the front. So I'm not sure.
Well, interestingly enough, Tim Scott apparently has more money on hand in his campaign committee than either Trump or DeSantis. What he doesn't have is all the money that DeSantis has sitting in his PACs. That's where most of DeSantis's money is. Now, for those who don't understand how these things work, a PAC has to operate independently of the campaign. There can be no cross-pollination. They can't talk about each other or talk to each other. They can't coordinate. They cannot say, all right, you advertise in Iowa and we'll advertise in New Hampshire. They're supposed to be completely independent.
Yes.
And just a couple of weeks ago, Ron DeSantis actually took himself out of his PAC. He had previously been the top guy at the PAC, but he took himself out so that he would not have problems with the Federal Election Commission. Of course, we know that there's always ways of coordinating without actually without actually talking to each other. One of the most common is that a PAC will release a press release and they'll put it out on their website. We're going to spend $2 million in Des Moines, Iowa, between such and such a date and such a date to buy TV ads. Then the campaign committee knows what they're going to do, and they know that they don't have to spend that money in Des Moines. Yes. They'll spend it in another part of Iowa, or they'll spend it in New Hampshire. So they can get information to one another as long as it's not directly going to one another, as long as
Can't be
they're telling the whole
direct.
world.
Yes, it can't be direct coordination. I've been in this position as well. I mean, I'll help a campaign on as being part of a local Republican committee, but then I'll maybe pick up a contract doing whatever work, whether it's canvassing or whatever it is for a PAC that is supporting that same campaign. But then once that happens, you need to stop coordinating with anyone on the campaign directly. And it really does mean you can't coordinate with them directly. It really does mean that, like, and that discussion does happen. But at the end of the day, exactly like you just said, there are
Avenues.
secondary avenues of coordinating. And honestly, I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong, as long as you're following the guidelines of not doing the direct coordination, or then they can argue that it's like conspiracy working together. I mean, if you can work around it, then I don't see anything wrong with that in particular. It just seems to make sense.
And in DeSantis's case, you not only have the PAC that he was involved with, that was his PAC, so to speak, for the longest time. You've got 3 or 4 other PACs that are pro DeSantis PAC that really had nothing to do with him, that are collecting tremendous amounts of money, 25-30 million dollars in each of them, maybe more at this point. We don't know what the next reporting period is going to bring, and we'll see how much money they've got. But DeSantis seems to have tremendous amounts of money behind him, more so than Tim Scott, more so than Trump. And one of these PACs could certainly outspend Tim Scott and still have plenty of money on hand, and just really saturate Iowa and New Hampshire with pro DeSantis ads, with anti-Trump ads, with anti-Tim Scott ads. I don't see a whole lot of anti-Scott stuff coming. It's possible,
yeah, that wouldn't make any
see
sense. It just
But
wouldn't make to spend the money. I don't see why it would make sense. I don't know. I'm really curious to see how the DeSantis campaign, and let me be specific. I mean, the whole campaign, including the PACs, like you're saying, not directly his campaign. Are they really going to attack Trump? Is that the angle they'll do for the primary? Or do you think they'll skip it altogether and make the focus about Biden like it should be from the get-go and just try to weather it? I'm not really sure. And we're about to see.
My best guess is that whichever PAC looks like it is the furthest away from having any kind of direct contact with DeSantis will go after Trump, because they're going to need to do that. And I think the messaging is not going to be anti-Trump as such. I think the messaging is going to be that Trump can't win. That's what they're going to be. And
that would be, 1, accurate messaging, and 2, I think smart messaging, because then it's not going after his movement. It's just going after realism, which you would hope that voters on the right are more about being realists, and they might get around that. I mean, I know that I'm one of them. I don't think Trump can win against Biden again.
I don't see it happening. He's got a lot of difficulties right now. Number one, he doesn't have the kind of money that he had in his previous 2 campaigns. The biggest donors, not just the biggest donors, all of the big donors that had given him millions of dollars. I mean, there were people that wrote checks for $10 million to his PACs.
He had Trump had the Mercers behind him, which was a huge powerhouse back then, and they're not as involved now. Yeah,
as well as many other people. All those big donors have backed away from Trump. A lot of them have said that they're going to support DeSantis. Others have said they're going to take a wait and see attitude as to who they're going to support, but they're not supporting DeSantis as such. I mean, Trump as such. So that's one of his problems. He's going to have a financing problem, and he's not going to reach into his own pocket in order to finance this campaign. He could, but he's not going to. So that's one of his problems. Another problem he's got is the fact that he's got a lot of legal issues. He just got he was just found liable in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case, which was about her accusations that he had sexually assaulted her in a dressing room of a high-end department store in New York City, in Manhattan. He was found liable for defamation. He was found liable for sexual battery. He was not found liable for rape, which was one of the underlying accusations against him.
Right.
But he turned around and he called this woman all sorts of terrible names within 2 days of the verdict. Called her a liar. Said he'd never met her. When a photograph was shown at the trial that showed the two of them together. I mean, if he had come out and said, "Look, I don't remember having met her. I've met so many people and had my photo taken with so many people. I cannot remember ever having met this person." That would be one thing. But after having shown that photograph in court, to then repeat the idea that I've never met this woman, it's a problem. And she is now talking about suing him again for defamation because of what he said.
Yeah. I'm glad
he's got the.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Ladies first.
I know. I'm glad that you brought it up because I believe we talked about it last time, and we kind of agreed. We weren't really basically what a New York jury found. So this is not, you would assume, a jury that's not politically in favor of him at all, right? And they still found that the consensus that I understood was that they didn't believe that a rape happened either, which is kind of how I felt about it.
There wasn't enough evidence to prove rape. Yeah. Whether or not that happened, we don't know, but legally.
Yes, they had an altercation. They definitely knew each other. I don't know to what extent. I mean, anyone could say they maybe know Donald Trump. I'll be frank. This lady seems like a kook. Like she is a kook. Like she said crazy things about rape. She said crazy things on CNN in many interviews in the past. So I don't know how sane she is, but I mean, yeah, there was some kind of altercation, but I believe that he went on that CNN open house town hall and said, "Look, I don't know this lady at all." And maybe he means in the extent that, like, maybe I saw her in passing at a party, or maybe that's true. But they were definitely an acquaintance to some extent.
Well, here's the thing. You cannot repeat something that you have been found liable for in a defamation suit and keep insisting that it's true. You're just going to open yourself up to another defamation lawsuit. Now, here's an interesting thing. We've got in that case, there's a mixed bag of the standard of proof. As far as the sexual battery and so forth are concerned, the plaintiff only has to prove her case by a preponderance of the evidence, which means 51%. So they only have to show that it is 51% likely that what she's saying is true. And that means that Trump would be liable. The defamation, because he is a public figure, it was ruled that they not only have to prove that he lied and that he knew that he lied, they have to prove that there was actual malice involved in the lie.
Right.
And it has to be done by what's called clear and convincing evidence, which, if you think of a preponderance of the evidence, is 51% likely, and beyond a reasonable doubt is 99% likely. Clear and convincing falls somewhere in the middle. So somewhere around 74, 75% likely. All right. But it is a much higher standard still than preponderance of the evidence. They still found him liable of defamation. So if they found him liable at that level of for defamation, and then they voted him not liable for the rape, that means that these jurors were keeping an open mind. They did not go in there deciding the case ahead of time.
Yes.
That's the interesting part of it, because and a lot of conservatives thought that there was a decent chance that these jurors were in there and they'd already made up their minds before the case came to trial. But
yes,
I mean, appear that that's the case.
Oh, that was more or less my point, that for them to come across this accusation, or this finding in that suit, is probably a jury. It's the Southern District of New York. You'd assume that pool is arguably not in Trump's favor, which is why we're assuming that it wouldn't go well for him. But they seem to come out with a verdict somewhat in line with kind of how I saw it, which I believe I'm kind of objective to the situation, because not pro-Trump or anti-Trump really in this situation. And I was looking at it like, it doesn't really seem plausible to me that from what has been presented that there was a rape, but there was an altercation, and it's a defamation suit, and he has a problem with the tweets and his interviews, and this is
And
something where
self-control.
and control, and that's this wasn't a criminal case, it was a civil case, so it kind of seems reasonable, especially for where it went down. It seems way more reasonable than the other things that went down that have been, the other litigation that he's involved in.
So anyway,
This was not a political persecution.
That's one of the issues that he has legally, that he's trying to appeal this case. There's a good chance there's going to be another case against him with the same plaintiff, because he just keeps repeating these things. Then he's got the Georgia case, which it looks at this point like there's going to be an indictment sometime around August. The district attorney there has informed the sheriff that that they're going to need traffic control and all kinds of things in August. They've informed the courts that they're going to ask the courts to clear the calendar for about a week, so that they have the ability to take this case to the court. So it looks like August is going to be the drop dead date for that. And what that's about is, during the whole counting period after the 2020 election, Trump called Brian Raffensperger, I forget what his first name is, but Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, and demanded that they find 11,000 something votes so that he would override Biden's win. And as you and I discussed off the air, if that's the only evidence they have is this phone call, it's going to be difficult to make a case.
Yes.
Because that's just not enough. He can simply say, look, I was convinced that there actually were extra votes out there, and I was asking the Secretary of State to find votes that were missing, in my view. And that would be plenty to bring reasonable doubt. He doesn't have mens rea, guilty mind. He doesn't have intent to commit any kind of fraud. So chances are they have some other evidence that we don't know about, if they're willing to indict him on this basis. But I don't know. We're just guessing at this point. It could very well be that the DA down there is just incompetent and is making a politically based indictment. It's possible. In Georgia, it's unlikely, but it's possible. Then you've got the Washington, D.C. case about the classified documents, which in my mind, that's the one that's most dangerous for Trump. That's the one where he can actually be shown to have committed a crime. The question is will they be able to show intent? But he actually did do the things that they are accusing him of, because they found the classified documents in his possession. He's admitted that he had them in his possession. He's claiming that he declassified them, which is where the intent issue comes in. But under federal law, you can't just declassify documents. There is a process that it has to go through. The president doesn't have the right unilaterally to just declassify documents. People think he does, but he doesn't. It's not a presidential power that's in the Constitution. It was created by statute, by federal statute, and you have to follow the processes set forth in the law. You can't just say that hey, I declassified him and that's it. And Trump made the absolutely absurd claim that if a president even thinks about declassifying a document, it's declassified. That makes no legal sense whatsoever. You can't just think about something and declare that it's been done. The president has to follow the legal procedures that are in place. Whether or not they can prove that he intended to break the law is going to be another story. But I think this is the one that's most likely to cause him real long-term damage. The New York City case, I think there's a really good chance that he'll be found guilty, but that will be because the New York State has some fairly corrupt procedures in place in their judicial system. And I think if it
Yes.
gets to the Supreme Court on appeal, that conviction will end up being overturned. But I think it's likely that there will be an initial conviction. It just won't be valid in the long term.
Now, with all of that, all of those cases that you just went over, and all the possibilities, do you think at some point, what are the impacts going to be on both sides of the Trump supporters and the not Trump supporters, both not Republican, not Trump supporters, and the Democrats, of all of this going on? And does it really matter what the outcome of any of them is? Because is it possible that at this point it just seems like we're going on over 4 or 5 years now of white noise of trying to get him for something? Every day he's going to be arrested and they never get him, and if they do, it's over something arbitrary. And or when we talk about the classified documents, I mean, it seems like that implicates almost every politician or every person who's been in office to an extent. So I don't know. Can it still be effective collectively or not? Because at some point, are people just going to, is it just white noise?
I think that there is going to be an impact on Trump's campaign as a result of the criminal cases. I don't think the outcome is going to have much of an impact, but the cases themselves will. Because unlike the civil case in which he refused to go up to New York and sit there, in criminal cases, the defendant is required to sit there for the entire proceeding. Every day that the jury meets and listens to testimony and so forth, the defendant has to be there for the entire proceeding. So that means that you're going to have one case after another after another. You're going to probably have 3 criminal cases in which he has to sit there for a week to 2 weeks at a time. You're talking as much as 6 weeks, maybe more, that he is not going to be able to campaign. He will not be able to go around the country and campaign. And if it happens during the Super Tuesday campaigns, then that's a big, big problem. He will not be able to. A presidential candidate flies from state to state, hitting 4 or 5 states a day during the run up to Super Tuesday. And we've got several Super Tuesdays now. It used to be just one. I think there's now 3 or 4. And if he's not able to actually campaign for even one of those, much less if it's multiples, that is going to cause a massive issue as far as his ability to win the nomination. That is something that cannot be overcome with money. It's something that cannot be overcome by insulting the opponents. It's something that can't be overcome with rallies after the fact. For the week or two running up to Super Tuesday, you've got to be able to campaign every single day. Running for president is more than a full-time job, really. You're talking about doing about 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't have Sunday off. Yeah, you take a couple of hours to go to church. But
running for any offices. I mean, running for Congress is a full-time job. I mean,
but this is more so. Well, you and I have both worked on state legislative campaigns. We've worked on congressional campaigns. I've managed a few congressional campaigns. We know what it's like. But a lot of people don't realize how much of you're talking about full-time job, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. That's 84 hours a week. That's 2 full-time jobs. That's double a full-time job. That's not just 40 hours a week. It's more than 80 hours a week.
It's really interesting.
If you can't be there, if you can't go out and campaign because you're sitting in a courtroom, that will do tremendous damage to your campaign.
It's interesting you bring that up because it's not even how I was thinking about it, but you're completely right in that if he physically can't be out campaigning, especially a candidate like Trump, let's be real, he is very good with his crowd. He is very good at reading the room when he's in the right space. And that's how he's been very effective. And that's why his rallies have been very effective. He does well with that. I would say the most recent one is the CNN town hall. He read the room there. It was all Republican voters. He did very well. He did very well with that. So
that's an interesting thing. The CNN case is very interesting because you have to keep in mind the fact that he packed that room. He absolutely packed that room with his own people. And it
Yes.
wasn't hard because CNN's normal viewer base, the liberals who like to watch CNN, none of them wanted to be there. They were
Right.
incensed that CNN would do this. They didn't want CNN holding a town hall, giving Donald Trump a soapbox to speak from. And they were incensed and they stayed away. So Trump was able to pack the room with his own people. There's no question that the people
Yes.
that
So
were in
when
there
he
were,
can do that, he does well. So my point is, it's interesting that
Yeah.
you bring up that if he physically can't do that because he has to sit in a courtroom, yeah, that actually is a big logistical, huge problem. I was thinking more of when I asked this question, it was more of the messaging of the voters overall. Like, at what point does it just become ad nauseum and word vomit? And it's like, again, it's been since Russia, since this, since that. Like, at what point is it like, okay, well, all this is going on too? Like, is
Well-
there or is there not going to be a point where people care anymore about that and they either are pro or against Trump for different reasons? I'm not sure.
Let's look at how the election breaks down. And this is now a general election issue. We didn't used to be a country that was so geographically polarized, not since the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. Once people started moving all over the place, we had a real hodgepodge of opinions all over the country. And it was because of that Ronald Reagan was able to win 48 states in his first election and 49 states in his second. That's never going to happen again, at least not in our lifetimes. Now we are polarized as badly as during Civil War times, although we are not likely to break into a shooting war. It's unlikely that we're going to have people on the two sides shooting at each other and hundreds of thousands of people dying. But we have a different kind of civil war. We have a very polarized country, and we have a civil war of words. As a result, we have the red states and we have the blue states. The solidly red states, they're always going to go vote for the Republican, whether it's Trump, DeSantis, Scott, whoever. That person is going to win the Republican states, the red states. The blue states are always going to go for the Democrat. New York, California, Illinois, Oregon, these states are always going to go for the Democrat. The Democrats can nominate a moldy slice of pizza. Those states will vote for that candidate.
We just did it.
Well, yeah,
that just happened with Hope.
There's truth in what you said.
Although that was spicy. That was spicy. Lee Zeldin did have a chance.
So
yeah,
we're left with 6 to 7 states, swing states, which are in play, as they might say. And we're talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, sort of became a swing state this time around. It never was before. And I don't think it's going to be if Trump is out of the race. But for the time being, it's being counted as a swing state. There's Arizona. So there's a handful of them. In those states, you have a similar kind of division as you have in the country as a whole. You've got solid Republican voters and solid Democrat voters. And for the most part, they're close to the same number. You have roughly the same number of solid Republican voters and solid Democrat voters in all those states. So the people who are going to decide who the president of the United States is in our current situation are the middle of the road voters in those swing states. They're not middle of the road voters in the rest of the states. They're not the solid red voters. They're not the solid blue voters. The middle of the road voters in those states. Those people have now gotten to the point where they are used to hearing about scandals regarding Trump. They've either already made up their minds to vote whichever way they want to based on their opinions of Trump, or they've decided that these scandals don't matter to them. Either way, I don't think the outcome of these cases, whether he's found guilty or not guilty, is going to make a whole lot of difference. What's going to matter is, can he reach out to these voters and make them like him? And I don't see a path for him to be able to do that.
I actually really tend to agree with that. I really don't have much to add to that. I agree with exactly that commentary. I don't think it's going to make a difference for those people who are in the middle in those key areas, because it is a lot of white noise for them. But it doesn't mean they will support him or not. They will or will not support him. It doesn't mean that either. That's not what they're. Those people are probably not voting on any of this noise. Those are probably people really voting on their bottom lines.
Yeah, in general, that's exactly what the middle of the road voters do. They vote based on what they believe, and they're not always correct. It's what they believe is to their financial benefit.
Yes.
And it could be right or they could be wrong, but they're going to vote that way. But as we saw in last year's election, it doesn't always go that way.
No.
Normally, a midterm election is a referendum on the performance of the president, of the incumbent president, the president in office at the time. And that referendum is expressed through whether or not people vote for or against his party. And that's normally what happens. And that's why an incumbent president's party usually loses about 20 to 30 seats in the House of Representatives, sometimes as much as 60 or 70. Back in the early part of the 20th century, there were elections when the incumbent president's party lost 110 seats in a single election. There were massive swings. We haven't seen anything that big lately, but we have seen 50, 60, 70 seat swings. It didn't happen this past election. It wasn't a referendum on Biden. People were paying a lot more for gasoline. They're paying a lot more for food. We're having issues with inflation. We're having issues with interest rates going up. All the things that killed Jimmy Carter in the 1980 election are there against Biden right now. But he barely lost. The Democrats barely lost seats in the House, barely. And they gained a seat in the U.S. Senate. And the reason for that is because Donald Trump's involvement reframed that election. Instead of being a referendum on Biden, it became Trump versus Biden round 2. And all the people who voted based on a personal dislike of Trump in 2020, again voted based on a personal dislike of Donald Trump in 2022. And so that shows us that he's going to have a real problem with the middle of the road voters. We had a dress rehearsal for 24 in the 22 election.
Yes, I think you're right in the sense of, Carrie Lake's race, a couple of other ones where they were super MAGA people, and they all seem to not turn out. But I will also say a lot of the loss of that red wave was Republican infrastructure messaging, specifically with, at least here in the New York races, the after effects of Roe v. Wade. And the abortion thing. So I agree with you that you're right about the red wave did not happen because of a lot of the Trump MAGA races not coming to fruition, but there was also more to it than that. And that's someone who was in it for this cycle. So it was both.
Well, the blue states had a particular issue. The Republicans in the blue states had a particular issue in that you don't have anybody there who's used to winning elections. They don't know how because they've never really done it. Oh yeah, a few individual elections here, a few individual elections there. But on a wave level, on a massive level, you don't see that happening. You actually had the basis for a red wave in New York. You gained seats in the U.S. House.
We did. Lee Zeldin's race proved
very close to winning the governor's election. So it wasn't a bad year for Republicans in New York.
No,
but they don't know strategically how to run winning campaigns. They don't have that experience because all they've run is losing campaigns. And a big part of it, I'm going to be very fair here, a big part of it is demographic. It's because there are so many more Democrats than Republicans. It's not just that the Republican leadership is bad, but they are highly inexperienced.
That's being really kind, but you might be right. You might be right.
Well, I don't want to, all I want to do is talk about the facts. I don't want to insert my opinion into that because I've
Yeah.
been out of New York for 10 years. You know a lot more
Yeah. Well, it's
about
difficult because
that end of it than I do.
I think I'm just still bitter about putting so much effort in and then not seeing it come through for reasons that I think are ridiculous. So, but then again, if I can't, not just one person can see something and change it. So, the New York Republicans, I don't know. I, the success in New York, which I have said many times on this podcast already, New York and Florida did have the red wave. The rest of the country did not, but New York and Florida did have the red wave. And I attribute a lot of that to the governor, Lee Zeldin's governor campaign pulled a lot of that ticket up. He did have the support of the Republican committee infrastructure, but he had their support, but I don't think that's what got him there. I don't.
The
I think that
fact
was
that
really
Lee
his own
Zeldin was
campaign.
able, the fact that Lee Zeldin was able to get that close in a state that is
Remarkable.
more than 3-1 Democrat tells me that there are a lot of Democrats in New York who are willing to look at the other side of the aisle.
They are, and
they're not
if you see
committed liberals.
yes, and he pulled those 4 House seats. I believe he was a significant factor in that, if not the most crucial one, having helped a couple of those campaigns. So I don't know if they would have done it without Lee Zeldin at the top of the ticket. I really don't.
Now, Zeldin is a relatively conservative guy. For
Yes,
New York,
yes,
he's a very conservative guy.
He stuck by that. He stuck by that in his campaign, and I watched him give speeches, for the whole 2 years he campaigned that campaign, and and I took him around my own town in Ulster County personally to campaign, and he said, this is not going to be about doing the middle of the road stuff. This is about doubling down on the conservative values and running with it and actually having a backbone about it. And I do think it resonated. And I think it was also about, and his big thing now is, if you've seen what he's done since he has, since post-election, he's now started a PAC. He actually, this past week, he just, so he's doing some kind of 50, I think it's a 50, what is the charity? 501(c)(3)
501(c)(3).
Why 50? Yes. He just put that as Zeldin Cares, and it's about getting into areas of New York.
There's one thing in particular, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, Zeldin was fairly pro-life, correct?
Yeah, that's my whole story of how I ever came into contact with his briefly interning for him and then working on his campaign briefly. And then ever since was that I met him his first day in office as congressman at the March for Life. He was my congressman for New York 1 when I lived on Long Island. Yeah. He's very pro-life.
If you have a pro-life Republican in one of the 2 most blue states in the country, New York and California being those 2, and he came within a few points. What was it, 3 or 4 point margin? I mean, it was a very close margin.
I believe so. Yes, it was
with
very
Kathy Hochul.
Significant.
He came within a few points of winning that blue state, that very, very strongly blue state, just months after Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yes.
That tells us that the Democrats are not going to be able to use abortion as a successful platform for defending their party.
I would hope
not
so.
In many places.
I would hope so, but it's very interesting because then you can look at the New York 19 special election, which happened because Delgado was promoted to lieutenant governor, right? Mm-hmm. So that New York 19 special election between Pat Ryan and Mark Molinaro, Pat Ryan won that, in my opinion, because of failures of local Republican infrastructure, and I'm part of that infrastructure, so I had issues with that, as well as he campaigned on that Roe v. Wade, women have a right to choose thing, and Mark Molinaro did not take the significant pro-life stance. He kind of just ignored the entire thing instead of
that's a mistake. That is a mistake.
And I agreed with what he said, though, is that I'm running for Congress. This is a state issue, and that was correct, and that's where they left it.
Yes, but the problem is that in order to win these elections, Republicans have to be able to do 2 things. One, they have to get their own base to turn out in higher numbers. And that means you can't waffle on fundamental issues. You can't waffle on guns. You can't waffle on abortion. You can't waffle on anything that strong conservatives think of as being a necessity. A lot of them just won't turn out.
So we can talk
And
about
number
just the
two,
abortion issue. I'm sorry, go ahead.
and number two, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but number two is that they have to convince middle of the road voters, at least a significant portion of them, not necessarily a majority, but a significant portion of them. And in some places like New York, you have to have a majority of those people to cross over to the Republican side. You even have to convince Democrats to cross over to the Republican side. And what a lot of voters who are willing to cross over are looking for is honesty. They don't care necessarily if they disagree with you. But if they sense that what you're trying to do is pander, that you're trying to play both ends against the middle, you're trying to not take a position on an important issue, they think of that as being dishonest, and they won't vote for you. You have to realize that voters are not stupid. They sense when you're being straight with them and when you're not.
I completely agree with that, and I have also apologized for interrupting you, but that more or less that I was going to say is at the end of the day, maybe Lee Zeldin was successful because not so much of New York, like he's very much a fiscal conservative, and his voting record proves that. And then he was socially conservative as well, especially with the pro-life votes and everything. And that has meant many times that he didn't always vote with the Republican Party when he was in Congress. That's what his record showed. But at the end of the day, people have respect for anyone in politics who might have a backbone, and most of them don't. So maybe just taking the hard line, saying, no, this is my platform, I'm sticking to that. People might even like that on principle, even if they don't even like the platform. And that's kind of what you were just saying.
And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about two governors two gubernatorial candidates in two very different states, demographically and politically, both of whom use similar tactics. One was already in a place where his win was virtually guaranteed, and he created a massive red wave for the Republican Party, and that's Ron DeSantis here in Florida.
Right.
The other in a very, very strongly blue state who almost upended everything and took the governor's mansion. And they both did basically the same thing. They said, I'm a conservative. These are my principles. I'm not going to back off from those principles. I'm not going to pander to people who disagree with me. But I would like folks who are not part of my base to listen to what I'm saying and to understand that I will perform this job honestly and based on principle, and that is the best thing you can have.
So yes on that, but also Lee Zeldin went to areas that were never touched in New York State, which is why I think he picked up a lot of stuff, especially in the city. Even though I know he lost in the city, he also got so close in the city because he went in there. He went to areas where Democrats was like, it's so deep blue, we're not going to go there. And Republicans said, it's so deep blue, we have no chance, I'm never going to go there. He went in there. And that's exactly to that point, is going into those demographics is not only asking those voters listen to me or believe in me. He went in there and said, let me listen to you. And I think that was effective, especially in the religious communities and conglomerates in like Brooklyn and Queens. He was able to do that. I personally, at being up here in Ulster County and having been very familiar with his very strong base in New York 1 and Suffolk County and Smithtown. Oh my goodness. I mean, maybe 80, I want to even say like 70, 80% of where the town I grew up in and when I campaigned for Congress was always going to go for him anyway. I mean, he had such a powerhouse down there. But up here in Ulster County, I was a little frustrated because he wasn't able to get that kind of support. And what I would say is a similar blue area to where he did a lot of effective work in the city. He did. And by doing just what you just talked about, and that's from what I understand what his charity or his nonprofit organization is kind of targeting is that he's calling them underserved New Yorkers by saying that no party has political interest in talking to them or representing them. And it's true. And he's going to go in there and talk to them. And in his governor campaign, he got into enough of them in the 2 years. I mean, that guy was everywhere. And let's also not forget that he is he's active in the Guard. And there was, I'm sorry, the Armor Reserves. So even when we were talking about scheduling him for campaigns, events, for 2 years he was running for governor, and I was working with them, there was a weekend every single month that he was doing Army Reserves. And
Yeah.
when you talk about, we're talking about how Trump being on, having to sit in a courtroom would be so costly. He pulled off this New York governor race so close with a weekend, a month, every single month for 2 years. He was in the Army doing the reserves duties, and also he fought leukemia. So,
Yeah.
was leukemia or lymphoma? A serious illness. So I mean, he has a backbone, and he is a real deal. Like, he's a fighter. I just know that personally, but also his campaign shows that. You don't need to know that personally.
But I think Republicans around the country need to learn from both Lee Zeldin and Ron DeSantis about how to do this. You cannot, you can't waffle on the issues. You can't start picking and choosing, what you're going to be conservative on and what you're not going to be conservative on. It doesn't work. The Republican voting base doesn't want people who are halfway conservative. They want people who are truly conservative. And other voters, they basically want to see somebody who is honest and who is going to be good on economic issues. And that gives the Republicans a big built-in advantage, because we are better on economics every time than the Democrats are.
Of course.
So we have a
And
big
that is
advantage
something that we should, yes, of course. Yes.
and we shouldn't throw away our advantage by pandering to those people and trying to, play with them on issues like abortion, because they're going to sense why that's being done. A Republican is not going to win pro-abortion votes. It's just not going to happen.
No.
But you can win the votes of people who are middle of the road, or who otherwise have placed other issues on a higher priority than abortion, financial issues, economic issues, and so forth, if you are honest with them. And some of these guys just don't want to be honest. Anyway, we got way off the topic, because the
we got
question
lost
you'd
in
asked me-
Republican politics. See right there.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting conversation. The question you asked me is whether the outcome of these criminal cases are going to impact Trump's ability to win elections. And I don't think they will. I don't think it's going to be the outcome that's going to impact him. I think it's going to be,
I agree,
the ability to campaign while this is going on. But we've got, other things that are happening that are strange. We've got, we were talking so much about how red Florida is. Well, just a few days ago, the NAACP, actually, I think it was just this morning, the NAACP announced that they are going to issue a quote unquote travel advisory to Florida, asking African Americans to not come to Florida because it is dangerous or something of that nature here, which is complete and utter nonsense. It is a completely political ploy that's being done. And their claim is that it's because DeSantis has signed bills that defund the diversity, inclusion, and equity programs in the state-run colleges, and that in any school, high school, secondary school, college, whatever that's being funded by the state, African American history classes that go beyond just basic history into questions of reparations and microaggressions and things like that are not going to be permitted. And that to them is somehow dangerous.
I mean, I don't even know what to say about this. You bring it up as the first that I'm hearing of it, but of course that's ridiculous, and it just opens up the avenue for anything. I mean, Florida is going to be what, anti everything now? It's going to be. They already tried this with they're anti-gay and all this. I don't really understand what the I don't really understand what the goal is. Like, I don't understand what they think they're going to achieve by doing something like this, because I don't think do you think it's going to stop African Americans from living in Florida? Like, do you? I don't.
Well, it might stop some people who were considering moving here. They might move somewhere else. It might keep people who are considering coming here on vacation from coming here, and they might go somewhere else. Yeah, to some extent, it might do that. But I think it's more likely that what they're trying to do is they're using this as a fundraising appeal. They're reaching out to people, a lot of whom were probably not going to come to Florida in the next few years anyway.
Right.
It's now expensive to come here on vacation. It's not something that lower middle class people are able to do anymore. You have to be upper middle class or higher to. I mean, it's $100 a day per person to go into Disney.
I
It's
thought it was
not
more than
cheap.
that. I thought it was even more than that. Look,
Well,
I
it's
mean,
100 and something. I
my
don't know
family
the
can't
exact
swing
number.
in, and my husband does well. But we live in New
$40 a
York,
day
so we
just to
can't do
park your
anything.
car.
Right.
It's people who live here. We get the residency discount. Disney discounts is something like 90%. But you have to buy the year's pass. You can't just buy it for one day. So you buy a year's pass on 90% discount, and you go as many times as you want. If you're a Florida resident, that is. But so it might impact people that are coming down here. But those folks, there aren't that many people who can pay those kinds of tourism costs anymore.
No, I mean, this
Right
goes
now,
far
what we're
beyond
seeing,
race. I can't do it, and I wouldn't do it.
what
For a
we're
lot of
mostly
reasons right
seeing
now.
are people who are upper middle class or higher are coming to the tourist places, and people who previously had bought vacation homes here will come down for 5 or 6 months out of the year in the winter.
Mhm.
And they're not going to stop coming because of an NAACP travel advisory, because they own the house. They're not going to stop doing that. And
I mean, it's the NAACP issues travel advisors. Like, that's not who I would go to for a travel advisory. Like, I mean, it's just absurd, and it just in itself, like, and maybe it's because maybe I went to school for aviation. My dad's an airline pilot, like, so maybe I'm familiar with travel advisories in a different sense. But like, why a political activist organization is releasing a travel advisory? Like, if anything, it's comical.
Travel advisory usually comes from the State Department, and it's for
Yes,
places like North Korea. It's for Iran. It's for Venezuela.
I
You
would
don't want
check
to
it
go.
out before
It's
you
for
go to
Russia.
Europe, baby. Yeah, like I would. I've gone to Europe a couple times, and it's like you can check out the travel advisories and know what you're getting into at the time. Yeah, but I mean that's not going
You
to the
issue a travel.
NAACP, but at the same time, I also want to go to what's the equivalent of that for a conservative cause. I want to go to the Heritage Foundation for a travel advisory either.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So,
but a travel advisory is for somebody. You issue a travel advisory because you don't want people to go to Russia and get falsely arrested. You don't
right.
issue a travel advisory saying don't go to such and such a state because they don't believe in reparations. You don't go to such and such a state because they're teaching their kids that not all white people are racist from the moment they're born. That's the silliness of this.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but this is also something to talk about. How many Black Americans are actually, do you believe, are actually taking guidance from the NAACP, or because I tend to believe they're not. I tend to believe that the NAACP is more like white entitled liberals, ideological liberals, elitists, who are using the NAACP to spread their mantra.
Absolutely.
That's how I feel, because I didn't even know this from my own Instagram feed when everything goes on, when BLM was going on and all of that, those things. My white, upper middle class high school friends sharing stuff from the NAACP and donating to the NAACP. I didn't see one Black person working with the NAACP about anything. So
you're probably right about
farce.
that. You're probably right about that. But what I think they're really trying to do, they're not trying to keep people from coming to Florida, because people aren't going to stop coming to Florida because of the NAACP. What I think they're trying to do is they're trying to set the stage for massive fundraising waves of emails, so that they can bring in millions of dollars a day on these emails from people that they get angry. The angrier you are, the bigger the check you're going to write. Well, they're not checks these anymore. You're doing them online, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Right. I think I just dated myself there. Which in most states in the North is illegal. It's illegal to date yourself. But this is a very callous, cynical step that is aimed at making money. And I'm not going to pretend that Republicans don't do similar
Well,
things.
right. I mean,
But right
right.
now, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at this one thing that the Democrat side has done.
Well, I was going to sit there and agree. There's two ways to look at that. Like, yes, of course, if it's kind of crummy that if it's just for fundraising, but if your job is to be a fundraiser and it's effective, that's not doing your job badly, you know? So,
yeah, there was something that you wanted to mention about New York when we talked before we went on the.
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough time now to talk about it, but I'm sure we can pick up on it next week. But the local communities here, and specifically in the suburb counties of New York City, so that would include Nassau, Suffolk, on Long Island, and even up here into the Catskills and mid to upper Hudson Valley, the red ones anyway, have declared states of emergency over the migrant crisis. And it's a big deal.
Explain why that's an issue. What's going on?
Well, from what I understand is that, and it's really interesting, the Democrat politics, and I do think we'll have to pick up on this again next week because it's a bit of a discussion.
Sure.
But from what I understand, we have Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, really mouthing off at the Biden administration over this because New York City can't handle it. I mean, they're putting they're putting migrants in public school gymnasiums while the kids are in school. That's absurd. And now they're talking about bringing them out to Rockland County, to Ulster County, to Suffolk County. And Pat Ryan declared Ulster County a state of a sanctuary county when he was a county executive shortly before he ran for Congress. And that means they're going to be here. And Ulster County already has a housing crisis. This was a county that was crazy about COVID vaccination and all these things. And these people are not vetted medically. Yeah.
Rural counties are not where you want to have people that might end up homeless, because in the winter in the north, they're going to freeze to death. It's one thing to do it in a southern state and put them in a rural county, but in the north, you want those people in a city where they can have large centralized shelters to give them a place to stay during the night. Yeah.
Well, it's a live situation. You see a lot of the Republican led counties or the Republican legislators, or where I am in Ulster County, where we're heavy Democrat led. The Republican committees have come out and said they're calling on our county executives to declare it's a state of emergency. So I don't know what that's going to do. It's just going to elicit more funding, from what I understand, by declaring the state of emergency.
We're back to just doing things for money rather than doing things for efficacy.
And it's kind of silly, and a lot of it is, but it does, at the end of the day, whether it's grandstanding or it's for money, the actual people and the residents, the migrants and the residents of the counties will suffer by this.
All right. Well, like you said, we'll have to pick up on this next week.
Yes,
we'll make it.
It's a big issue.
We're doing the first. Folks, it's the end of the hour. Thank you so much for spending another hour with us, and we will talk to you again next week. Bye now.
Take care.